Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cherno. Welcome back to the Game Engine series. So lately you guys have really been digging this kind of live programming, live coding thing, so we're going to continue on with that today. Hopefully talk about textures, assets, loading stuff from the content browser, materials. There's a whole bunch of things that we're kind of in the thick of at the moment, which is, I guess, pretty exciting. Also a lot of work ahead of ourselves. So last time we, of course, we're talking about the content browser. I'll have that video linked up there. We were able to drag and drop scenes to load them into the content browser. And today we're going to just continue on and talk about how we can basically do the same thing with textures. So I want to be able to click and drag in a texture from the content browser into our actual scene, well, specifically onto an entity. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to do it in a bit of an intermediate fashion, I guess, today, because the way that we want to get into things is probably like we want to be able to drag and drop those textures into specifically materials, right? So if we have a texture, we want it to appear on an entity, like on our sprite renderer that we have, we should be setting a material to that. But we also need to think about what a material means, because we are a little bit in like a 2D rendering situation here, and the way that materials work for 2D rendering is usually very different than the way that materials work for 3D rendering. So we really need to think about the architecture of that as well. Lots of things to unpack and discuss. Forgive the mess that you see in the background here today. We've just been kind of reorganizing the office a little bit. Let's dive in and take a look at this pink cube and all the amazing things that we can do with it. So if you take a look at these actual things, by the way, if I'm going a little bit quick, I apologize. I literally was recording for like 5 minutes or talking for 5 minutes before I realized I didn't even hit the record button. So this is actually my second time running through all this. Complete disaster as usual. Live coding, am I right? Anyway, so we have this kind of scene here, which is made up of 3 different I guess sprites that we're rendering here. Sprites because, like, I mean, if you think about what these actually are, they're just quads. They've been given a color. This is not some kind of cube object. They're just quads. We have the ability to obviously change the color and set it to anything we want. Colors are a little bit lame. We want to be able to deal with textures as well. So if we come in and we take a look at the textures we have available, we obviously have like the ability to be able to actually render textures as part of like our shader inside our graphics pipeline. That's totally there. In fact, at the moment, I believe we're just constantly submitting a white texture for all of these because they don't have a texture at all. And then we're multiplying that texture with the actual color. So in other words, if we had set a color to something other than white and we then supplied a texture, it would just tint the texture. So that's our current workflow. The only problem is that we don't have the ability to actually submit one of our textures. And that's what we're going to add today. Now, we actually are going to have to probably take this back a notch eventually and talk about and have a little bit of a planning episode again, because like, how we progress with these textures, how we progress with these materials that we're about to kind of dive into, how we progress with assets as well, because we're getting to the point where we really need to start actually having an asset manager and not just dealing with data and memory and textures as they are, right? So what we need to do is kind of back this up, and I'll probably do this in the coming few episodes, and think about like the direction of this engine. And I have some ideas for that. Some of you are not going to like it, but we'll think about it. And by this I mean like specifically the Game Engine series version of Hazel. But the way that we structure this is going to be important, because we need to think about what part of the engine we're really working on and how we're actually going to move this into like a production environment. So the thing is, like, again, this is not like it's not meant to be a graphics series. It's not meant to be like a series in which I teach you guys how to specifically work on the graphics, the rendering part of game engines. Yes, rendering is a huge part of it, but we also have to worry about like what it takes to actually make a game. And there's a whole lot more to making a game, an arbitrary game, than there is like in terms of rendering. So rendering is great and all, but we also need to think about getting from point A to point B, and the goal of this series fundamentally is to make a game. And so because of that, I don't really, like, as you know, we've decided to kind of focus on 2D stuff first so that we can get to that end game sooner instead of having to worry about spending like a couple of years setting up a 3D renderer and then being able to make a game on top of that. So because we're not really going in the 3D direction at the moment, we do kind of not really need a lot of the kind of infrastructure and engine kind of design, I guess, that you would actually need for 3D. So a good example is materials, right? If you are focused on a 2D renderer, you don't really need materials. You can emulate like the idea of materials, but if everything is 2D, then everything you do, right? Of course, you can have custom shaders and particle effects and a whole bunch of other things, which I really want to have. I want to kind of build, even though we are kind of working on a 2D renderer here, I know it looks deceiving because this is in 3D space. Everything is in 3D space though, that's why. But the point is, you know, even though we're building a 2D renderer, I do want it to still be able to be really nice, right? Like I want it to look good. I want it to have particles. I want it to have post-processing effects, right? I don't want it to just be a pixel art style 2D engine, right? And so because of that, we are going to have to supply some kind of way to be able to create potentially an entity that has a custom shader, a custom material. So we will discuss materials to some extent. But when we look at Sprite Renderer, to me that says this doesn't need to have a material on it, because everything flows through that single shader at the moment. There's going to be like an Uber shader that is like our 2D batch renderer shader. And then that is just everything's going to flow through that. And since everything is going to flow through that, we can just expose essentially the uniforms or the data that comes along with that shader, including like the resources, like the textures. We can expose all of that through, for example, this Sprite Renderer component. Now we may want to make like a material that contains a color and a texture so that we can reuse that for multiple 2D objects. In fact, I should probably look at Unity's and Unreal's like 2D rendering and how they deal with materials. Maybe some of you guys can fill me in the comment section below, because I haven't really used those engines much to create 2D games. Usually like any kind of 2D stuff that I've done has always just been from scratch. So that's actually a good point. I should probably research that. But my point is, like, let's just say you have two entities, you want them to have the same kind of texture, the same color, the same setup of like, I don't know, tiling, what else we support, you know, all of that stuff. Then why would you wouldn't want to like, I mean, I guess you could copy and paste the entity or copy and paste the component, but it might make more sense to have a material asset that you can drag and drop into two different entities. And that way you can have a material, because I think Unity does still have kind of like materials for 2D rendering. It's just, you don't really need to have them in the sense that like in 3D, like there's a lot of data, there's a lot of different maps like going on for each material, but then also there are different shaders. For example, you might want to have something different for like skin. It could go entirely through a different shader. What about hair? You know, that will go through a different shader. You'll have transparent and like semi-transparent, translucent, you know, opaque materials. You have a lot of different things going on, you know, not to mention like environment and terrain and grass and glass and everything, you know. So it's a little bit different than what we necessarily need to have inside like a 2D renderer. So I do want to kind of, maybe next time it might make sense to sit down with pen and paper or like with a drawing board essentially, and actually think about how we're going to you know, create these kind of 2D entities and what a good workflow for materials would be. It'd be nice actually to be able to also preview these as thumbnails. That would be kind of nice, kind of loading them asynchronously, then like caching them into like a thumbnail database. In fact, if you guys want to see that, let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'll probably just focus on the actual game engine kind of side of things. But yeah, lots of different directions to go in from here. But anyway, for today, as I mentioned, let's actually focus on being able to load you know, a texture by just simply dragging and dropping it into a texture slot over here. Now, fundamentally, that's really easy to do. And again, whether or not I actually end up like keeping that versus, you know, switching to a material asset in the future, we will see, but the kind of infrastructure is going to be pretty similar anyway. So if we pop into components and we take a look at that Sprite Render component, I'm going to start by just giving it a texture, right? So we're going to have a texture that we can apply to this. Yeah, I mean, I guess materials, I guess if we're going for a full-on really cool 2021 style 2D renderer, right? Like a 2D plus renderer, we probably definitely do want materials, because I could imagine so many variations of things we might want, even if it is 2D. So I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are below, and we will talk about it. But basically, so I've got the ability now to set a texture. It's null by default, obviously. And so that's pretty simple, because now what it means is that if I wanted to, I can just go into, like, we don't have a scene renderer, do we? How do we render things in this engine? I'm so used to Hazel Dev. So we probably have like some kind of render, or maybe it happens in on update editor. Yeah, we do draw sprite, and draw sprite doesn't take in any kind. Oh, okay, takes in a sprite render component. Okay, cool. So that means that, again, what we could do is actually draw quad with a texture. So at the moment, draw sprite just draws quad, but what we could do is if source texture, draw quad. Do we have a draw textured quad? No, we just have a draw quad that takes in a texture. So that will be, let's just copy this, and then that will be, so transform, source color. What other things do we have? So we have size, obviously. Well, actually, what are the transform ones? Texture, tiling factor, tint color. Okay. So texture will be source texture. We might have a tiling factor eventually, but we'll leave it as, nah, you know what, let's pass in a tiling factor. Tiling factor. Tint color will be source color, and then we also have entity ID. Okay, so that's good. Otherwise, we'll just do this, right? So technically, we could actually just submit a white texture and run this through once, but I'm going to leave it as this for now. So let's also introduce a tiling factor, which of course will be 1 by default. So now going to the scene hierarchy panel, let's take a look at our color, which I think we only have one of. Yep, Sprite Renderer component. So I'm going to do two things. First of all, we're going to have our texture here, right? But we need to come up with a separate control for that, actually. And then over here inside IAmGUI, inside this draw component lambda, we're going to also have that, and we really need to come up with something a little bit better for our UI, because at the moment we've got labels on the right side, and like I'll end up copying some of the stuff I think from Hazel Dev soon. But basically, so this will be component.tiling factor. The speed will set at like 0.1, minimum will set to like 0, maximum will set to like 100, maybe like more like 10. Well, we'll set it to 100. We probably don't need a maximum, to be fair, but I'll just leave it at that for now. So at the very least, now we have a tiling factor. Now, what we need is kind of like to be able to actually drag in a texture. So how do we do that? Well, fundamentally, it's really simple, right? All we need is a drag drop target here. And again, you can set this up however you like. I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to have a button, right? Which is going to act as my target. So this is, I think, how we do it in Hazel Dev. So we're going to have a button. The button is just going to say texture, right? And this is going to be really lame for now because I'm not actually styling it at all. But we're going to have a button that's going to be called texture. Actually, let's give it a size. So we'll say it's like, I don't know what the vertical height of lines are. We should probably check. But for now, I'll just make it like 100 pixels long, and maybe if I make it 0, it will just be auto-sized. I need to figure that out. But basically, this is just going to act, the button's not going to do anything. We could get it to like clear it or something, but this is just going to be our texture. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to drag and drop something onto that texture. And the way that's going to work is basically the same way that we set it up in editor layer. And inside editor layer, we had begin drag drop target, right? And we had a payload. So I'm going to call this like asset, basically. So the payload is going to be asset. And then we're going to get a path, and then from that payload, because it's going to be the texture path. And then all we really need to do is be able to actually open up that that texture. So how we load a texture, I mean, I think we can just do component dot texture equals texture 2D create, and then we can give it a path, which will be this path. Now again, we've got like wide characters here, which is a little bit annoying. I forgot about this whole wide character thing. But basically we've got path. We can grab the asset path that we obviously need, followed by this path, which gives us this. And then for now, I know we don't have wide characters inside texture 2D. So this can just be our kind of path. So texture path. And then we can actually pass in texture path.string, I imagine. But yes, we should probably spend some time upgrading the engine to use these kind of paths instead of strings everywhere. Okay, so now that we have that, gasset path is one thing we don't have, but we can easily just, and I know it's temporary, maybe we'll handle, well, we need an asset manager first before we can have an asset path, but we'll just plop that into here. So now we can actually load a texture and set it pretty easily. So now all we have to do is go back to, let's see, where was this? So inside the content browser panel, and we basically, okay, so at the moment, oh, I guess it is content browser item. Why would we set it to be asset? Everything's an asset. So I'll just call this content browser item. So now we can drag stuff in there, and it's actually gonna be the item path. So did we just accidentally make it work without even trying? I think we may have. We'll see how this works. So everything's undeclared, of course it is. Yeah, that's what I meant. So Hazel render a texture. See if that clears it up. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So let's drag in that pink cube scene, and then I'm going to select one of these guys, and I'm going to try to drag in, so we have this texture button, which obviously does nothing, but I'm gonna grab this checkerboard and drag it into texture. And my goodness, that was amazing. So I don't know, to be honest, I don't know why it's all weird. Tiling factor works as well. Let's try the Cherno logo. Whoa, what's going on with this? Oh man, look, it's like half transparent. Is the image format wrong or something? That's interesting. I mean, this isn't transparent at all. Oh, but this is supposed to be transparent, actually, that's why. But why are we getting all this white everywhere? That's very interesting. What is our shader doing? Huh. We're rendering with this, right? We've got this wonderful switch statement. Color equals text color. Oh. But what happens? Wait. Okay, text color times equals this, but what happens if there's no alpha channel in the texture? That's interesting. I mean, it wouldn't really matter in the case of us having the Cherno logo. So the fact that this is like this is very interesting. But anyway, I mean, it kind of works. Oh, whoa. Oh, because it was, no, because I was going to say because it was selected. But no, something weird is going on. Because look, now it's fine. Huh. Let's set the third one. But this one's weird. And now they're both weird. Okay, something weird is going on with our batch renderer. I think that's fair to say. But you can see that we, let's move this. Let's just, we'll sweep that under the rug, if you know what I mean. So we'll, yeah, so you can see we've got our entity now with the Cherno logo. We can tint it to any color we want, as you can see, which is pretty cool. So we can do all of that stuff to it. We could even, I was gonna say reduce the opacity, but obviously the opacity in these parts is already 0. But we can reduce the opacity because you can see we can kind of see through it. Now this is going to depend on render order and stuff like that. And then of course we can also tile it. So in general, pretty cool, right? We now have the ability to easily kind of drag those things on to change to whatever texture we want. Again, it's a little bit dodgy sometimes, but we'll iron out those bugs, no problem. But that's the kind of general idea with these entities. And of course, we need a way to clear them. So yeah, really easy to just drag and drop in a texture. And that's going to be the gist of this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the like button. Short and sweet today, the way I like things. We're going to iron out those bugs. Actually, I'm going to commit this. If anyone wants to have a go at figuring out why, this will be a nice exercise actually, figuring out why we were getting those rendering kind of errors. Looks like it's combining textures. I think that the texture ID might be being put into the vertex buffer incorrectly or something like that. Then open up an issue on GitHub. I will merge in your pull request. I will discuss your pull request and do a bit of a code review in the next episode. That could be cool. Yeah, otherwise we'll probably continue on with having like a bit of a planning episode and seeing how we can progress with materials and whatever else we need to actually start building up proper kind of 2D scenes inside Hazel. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget you can help support the series by going to patreon.com/thecherno and get access to Hazel Dev, which is like the 3D kind of way more advanced version of this engine. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. I will see you next time. Goodbye.